It is a common misconception that your capacity to perceive absolute reality has somehow vanished. In truth, that profound ability was never lost. Rather, your mind simply became an absolute master at filtering the world around you. Distinguishing between these two concepts, loss versus filtration, is far more crucial than you might initially realize. When something is genuinely lost, it is entirely inaccessible and gone forever. But when something is merely filtered, it remains completely present. It is still arriving at your doorstep, constantly unfolding in every single millisecond of your existence. The catch is that this raw reality is continuously sifted through a heavy veil of personal interpretation. This psychological veil descended so slowly and seamlessly between your conscious awareness and the actual physical world that you eventually forgot the barrier even existed, falsely crowning this heavily edited version of existence as reality. You must understand that this mental screening mechanism is by no means a defect or a flaw. It was meticulously engineered by human evolution for incredibly pragmatic reasons. If your nervous system were to suddenly absorb every single sensory input, every sight, sound, and sensation without any form of selective curation, you would suffer a complete cognitive collapse before you even finished your morning coffee. From a very early developmental stage, your brain was forced to learn exactly which signals to magnify and which ones to mute entirely. It constantly runs a background diagnostic. Is this piece of information practically useful? Does it pose a physical or emotional threat? Have I encountered this exact scenario before? Does this new data align perfectly with the mental framework I have painstakingly constructed over a lifetime of surviving a highly complex world? Consequently, the mind trained itself to artificially manufacture an efficient version of your experiences, rather than bravely enduring the raw, unfiltered barrage of the universe. What makes this mental fabrication so incredibly compelling is how remarkably authentic it feels. To you, it does not feel like a carefully orchestrated illusion. It feels exactly like genuine, direct engagement with the physical universe. It simply feels like seeing. Yet, there is a distinctly pure dimension of perception that the vast majority of human beings have fleetingly brushed up against at least once in their lives, only to have the door slammed shut shortly after. This fleeting state stands in stark contrast to our standard, prefabricated daily perception. It happens in a singular heartbeat, where your psychological shield inexplicably drops, even for just a fraction of a second. Suddenly, the sensory data rushing in is completely untampered with. It hasn't been neatly boxed into convenient categories before registering in your consciousness. It hasn't been weighed down by the massive, burdensome archive of every biased conclusion you have ever drawn about life prior to that exact second. Whenever you stumble into one of these unfiltered pockets of time, you immediately recognize its entirely unique texture. The visual spectrum becomes remarkably crisper, and the physical boundaries of the objects around you command a much heavier, undeniable presence. There is an electrifying frequency of pure vitality pulsing through whatever happens to be sitting right in front of you, a vibrant, breathing aliveness that your everyday, curated reality simply cannot replicate. In these profound flashes, you are struck by the overwhelming realization that you are intimately touching the very essence of something real, as opposed to merely interacting with your brain's internal, synthetic representation of that thing. Naturally, when the average person suddenly experiences this raw, unedited clarity, they are completely at a loss for how to handle it. The sensation is far too intense, excessively immediate, and terrifyingly unmanaged. As a result, the mind's familiar filtration system violently snaps back into place almost instantly. It does this because filtering is safe, predictable, and resource efficient, whereas total psychological openness demands immense cognitive energy. However, it is vital to realize that this sudden burst of openness was not a malfunction in your system. Quite the opposite. It was the absolute closest you will ever come to observing the universe exactly as it is. You simply grew accustomed to forgetting that such a state of pure clarity was even attainable. And you didn't consciously choose to forget. It happened because your brain's filter is phenomenally skilled at masquerading as the sole, unalterable option for experiencing life. So, What exactly is this dominant mechanism stripping away from your life before you are even allowed to experience it? The primary casualty of this process is the true present moment itself. Granted, it doesn't erase the now completely. A watered down, highly compressed fraction of the current moment is permitted to pass through. However, the raw present as a pure, unlabeled phenomenon that hasn't been rapidly measured against your memories of yesterday or your anxieties regarding tomorrow virtually never survives the journey through your mental sieve intact. What ultimately arrives at your conscious awareness is a heavily chewed-up version of the now. It has been thoroughly contaminated by all your preconceived notions regarding what a moment like this should signify, how someone like you should react, and where a scenario like this typically leads. The genuine present is abruptly swapped out for a calculated forecast of the present. To be fair, this mental forecast is frequently accurate enough to keep you functioning, which explains why the filter stubbornly persists. But we must clearly distinguish between what is useful and what is fundamentally real. No matter how precise your mind's prediction might be, it will eternally remain a hollow, shallow echo compared to the vibrant reality it is attempting to simulate. It lacks profound depth. It hits your soul with significantly less gravity. The second major element your filter subtly steals from you is the authentic essence of the human beings standing right in front of you. It isn't that you are entirely blind to them. Obviously, you physically observe them and engage in dialogue with them. However, what you are genuinely interacting with, far more often than not, is merely a flattened caricature that perfectly aligns with the preconceived social framework you've already established in your head. You are engaging with the specific character role they play within your personal life narrative. You lock them into a rigid demographic or behavioral category before they are even given a fighting chance to demonstrate that they are complex, multidimensional individuals far beyond that basic label. Of course, there are rare, beautiful fractures in this system. This happens when a person says or does something completely out of character, shattering the restrictive mold you built for them. When they accidentally showcase a deeply hidden truth that your mental categorization could never have anticipated, the illusion breaks. For one crystalline second, you are looking directly at them, the true individual, rather than your comfortable, predictable projection of them. Naturally, this is incredibly short-lived. Your brain scrambles to update their character profile, and the defensive filter slams back down. Yet, within that brief, suspended window, a genuine human connection occurred that was profoundly real in a way your standard interactions almost never are. Finally, the third fundamental truth that your cognitive screen aggressively blocks out is the underlying energetic foundation of existence itself, often referred to as the quantum field. This is not some esoteric, distant philosophical concept. It is the incredibly active, literal foundation of every single fraction of a second you inhabit. It is the invisible architecture that constitutes the physical chair you are sitting on, the very fabric of the light illuminating your space, and the actual substance filling the seemingly empty void stretching between your body and the nearest wall. This fundamental field is inherently woven into the fabric of every possible perception. Yet, your mind's filter absolutely refuses to acknowledge this continuous, unified substrate. Instead, it deliberately fragments reality, feeding you a world composed entirely of separate, isolated objects. It prefers to give you easily identifiable items equipped with comfortable names, strictly defined characteristics, and highly predictable behaviors. The infinite field which exists as the absolute source of everything, acting as the dynamic womb from which all solid objects manifest rather than just the raw material they are constructed from, is completely destroyed during your brain's ruthless categorizing procedure. Despite this relentless mental editing, there are still magical, incredibly rare instances of profound inner quiet where the ultimate truth leaks through. During those fleeting instances of absolute stillness, perhaps lingering in the silent void between two consecutive thoughts, or suspended in the calm pause between one breath and the next, a tiny ripple of that boundless field manages to pierce the veil. And for that one breathtaking moment, you are finally standing in direct, unbridled contact with what genuinely exists right here and now, completely untethered from the restrictive, artificial map your nervous system has aggressively drawn over it. I find myself reflecting on this concept constantly. I wonder just how many hours of my waking existence are squandered navigating an artificial mental map rather than actually walking the raw, physical territory of reality. I contemplate how astonishingly rare it is for the untamed truth of the world to reach me without some form of psychological mediation intervening. What would it actually look like, I wonder, to walk through life with that defensive screen made just a fraction more translucent, allowing the genuine universe to bleed through more consistently? There is a heavy, undeniable price to pay for taking up permanent residence behind this cognitive shield, a cost that society has collectively agreed to accept as the standard human condition, blindly ignoring the possibility of a richer alternative. This consequence manifests as a persistent, lingering sense of alienation. It isn't necessarily an emotional separation from your peers, nor is it a complete detachment from your own identity. Rather, it is a profound estrangement from the essence of things themselves. It is a chronic disconnection from whatever is unfolding in the immediate present, intercepted right before your mind can sanitize it into something safe and easily digestible. You are left with the haunting sensation of acting as a secondary spectator in your own biography. You are just conscious enough to execute your daily duties and survive, but far too insulated to ever truly touch the visceral core of your surroundings. This chronic sense of detachment has become so deeply normalized that the vast majority of us have completely lost the ability to even recognize its presence. It operates like a low-frequency, monotonous drone buzzing beneath the surface of a life governed by artificial constructs. You can feel it as a subtle emptiness, a faint, pervasive dullness that manages to creep into even your most joyous occasions. It is that nagging suspicion that an experience hasn't fully landed, lacking the profound emotional weight it deserves. It is the vague, inescapable feeling that the vibrancy of the world has been artificially desaturated, even when logically, absolutely nothing is wrong with your circumstances. Yet, against all odds, there are instances where the genuine universe violently ruptures this illusion. It might be triggered by a sudden, breathtaking encounter with unscripted beauty. Perhaps a hauntingly beautiful melody reaches your ears, striking your soul before your rational mind has a chance to analyze and categorize the genre. It could be an organic conversation with a friend that wildly veers off the anticipated script, venturing into profoundly vulnerable, uncharted territory. Or maybe it happens in the wilderness, where the sheer, unbridled force of the natural field slices right through your mental architecture and strikes your consciousness head-on. In those crystalline flashes, you don't just intellectually comprehend the truth. Your very physical body remembers. Your cellular structure recalls exactly what it feels like to physically collide with absolute reality, to genuinely observe rather than passively consume your brain's heavily edited summary of the environment. That jarring juxtaposition between the numb norm and the vivid breakthrough is the most crucial piece of evidence you possess. This contrast simultaneously reveals two monumental truths. First, that your heavily censored version of existence is absolutely not the only way to experience life. And second, that you have been trapped inside that muted simulation for years, completely oblivious to the extraordinary alternative waiting just outside. I want you to pause for a moment and share your own experience in the comments section below. Tell me, when was the last time the raw universe managed to pierce your psychological armor? It doesn't need to be a massive, life-altering epiphany. Describe a tiny, fleeting microsecond where you directly collided with what was actually there, rather than your brain's dull anticipation of it. Keep it to a single, concise sentence, because those brief, undeniable flashes are the ultimate proof that authentic, unclouded perception remains entirely within your grasp. It is critical to grasp that the fundamental quantum fabric of the universe does not arrive at your doorstep pre-filtered. It is delivered to you in its absolute, infinite entirety. Every single millisecond contains the vast, unfiltered potential of the entire cosmic field, manifesting as a highly specific alignment of sensory data. The censorship does not originate from the external world. The mechanism of reduction exists entirely within the mind of the observer. This isn't philosophical poetry. It is exactly what the rigorous mathematics of quantum mechanics dictate when we interpret the physics of observation honestly. The foundational quantum field exists in a state of boundless superposition, where infinite possibilities exist simultaneously. It is the very act of observation that forces this limitless potential to collapse into a singular, concrete reality. And the conscious observer triggering this collapse is far from a passive, neutral sponge. The observer acts as a highly influential participant, directly dictating which specific iteration of reality is allowed to materialize into subjective experience. In this context, your filter is simply the dense web of your pre-existing expectations. These prior assumptions sculpt and aggressively prune the infinite possibilities, dictating exactly what collapses into your physical reality, long before the universal field can present its true majesty. This is not a colorful metaphor. It is the literal direct implication of measuring a quantum system. The psychological and energetic state of the observer fundamentally co-authors the final outcome. If a completely different individual, operating on a different frequency of awareness, were to observe the exact same moment, they would extract a wildly different physical experience. The raw material, the field, remains identical. It is solely the observer's internal sieve that determines which fragments of the cosmos solidify into their lived reality. Consequently, the severe detachment you feel is not merely a psychological quirk. It is a literal quantum mechanical separation. An individual operating behind a thick filter is physically disconnected from the vastness of the full field. They are merely interacting with a microscopic fraction of reality that their narrow expectations permitted to exist. Conversely, an individual who has successfully dismantled this barrier, who has cultivated a profound transparency in their perception, is not simply enjoying a more subjective or imaginative life. They are fundamentally experiencing a more complete reality. They are absorbing a much larger percentage of what actually exists before their mind's categorizing engine permanently shuts the vault. It is also worth noting that this protective veil rarely dissolves in a slow, gentle, or predictable manner. Instead, it cracks violently and without warning. There are very specific, intense environmental conditions that completely short-circuit the brain's ability to maintain its artificial simulation. These are profound instances where the incoming data is so completely alien, so wildly inconsistent with your internal framework, that the mind's processing center essentially crashes. The categorization engine stalls, and within that terrifying silent suspension of cognitive processing, the unadulterated universe floods in. Profound grief is one of the most potent catalysts for this phenomenon. This does not happen because mourning is in any way a desirable or pleasant state. It occurs because the sheer, crushing magnitude of immense loss completely overloads your filter's computational capacity, rendering it utterly incapable of sustaining the comfortable illusion of your ordinary world. The absolute permanence of someone who has passed away completely defies our standard psychological filing system. The sheer magnitude of their absence is far too visceral, far too immediate, and far too agonizingly real to be neatly packaged into a comfortable mental drawer. Because you are stripped completely bare by the sheer rawness of this vulnerability, the physical environment that remains suddenly assaults your senses with an unprecedented level of intensity. Mundane, everyday elements, the specific golden angle of sunlight slicing through your living room window, the undeniable physical gravity of a ceramic cup resting in your hands, the distant, rhythmic hum of urban traffic outside, suddenly hit your consciousness with a profound, piercing directness that they traditionally lack. A very particular caliber of beauty accomplishes this exact same phenomenon. I am not referring to superficial aesthetics that we quickly glance at, internally label as pretty, and promptly ignore. I am talking about a staggering, awe-inspiring beauty that strikes your soul long before your brain has the time to slap a descriptive tag on it. It anchors your absolute focus so intensely that your cognitive filter physically cannot reconstruct itself fast enough. In that suspended state, the object of your attention simply exists. It becomes hyper-present, immaculately specific, and authentically real in a profound way that its mere dictionary definition could never capture. Authentic internal tranquility produces a similar fracture in the illusion. This is absolutely not synonymous with mere sensory deprivation or a lack of external stimulation. Rather, it is a highly specialized state of mental quietude, where the relentless, churning gears of your psychological categorization engine dramatically decelerate. As this machinery slows, the expansive, silent void lingering between your mental labels suddenly becomes vividly apparent. Within this pristine, empty space, the raw reality of the present moment is finally granted the necessary runway to land directly in your awareness, completely unburdened by language or definitions. Intriguingly, there are instances where absolutely no identifiable catalyst triggers this awakening. It might occur on a remarkably mundane Tuesday afternoon, tucked quietly in the microscopic pause between two passing thoughts. Something entirely unexceptional will suddenly manifest without its customary mental baggage. For a split second, a chair is no longer a concept. It is just the raw, undeniable reality of the chair. The ambient illumination is simply pure light, and for that fleeting heartbeat, you are intimately entwined with both elements in a manner that completely defies your standard baseline of consciousness. I consider these sudden flashes of clarity to be the most compelling phenomena a human being could possibly study. My fascination doesn't stem from them being theatrical or overly dramatic, but entirely from their ruthless honesty. For one precious second, the artificial distance evaporates, and pure truth stands right in front of you. When this mental screen finally becomes translucent, the reality that floods in is not extraordinary in the typical, cinematic sense of the word. Instead, it is intensely ordinary, but ordinary in a drastically more holistic and saturated way than you have ever been permitted to experience. You are looking at the exact same physical room, illuminated by the exact same light, populated by the exact same individuals, yet everything vibrates with an undeniable depth of presence that your simulated reality simply cannot mimic. It is as if the volume knob on a previously muffled existence has suddenly been cranked up to its true, intended frequency. The environment isn't necessarily blindingly brighter. It is simply more there. Every single item becomes infinitely more specific, radiating its own inherent truth rather than functioning as a cheap, two-dimensional proxy of itself. Consequently, the human beings in your orbit manifest in an entirely different light. This isn't because they have magically transformed overnight, but simply because you are finally observing them, rather than looking at your rigid, prefabricated blueprint of who you assume they are. The raw person you encounter in this state is paradoxically much simpler, yet infinitely more intricate than your mental profile could ever accommodate. They are simpler because all the exhausting, invisible narratives you constantly project onto them have instantly dissolved. Yet, they are vastly more complex because genuine, unfiltered humanity possesses a boundless specificity that no restrictive stereotype could ever successfully cage. Furthermore, there is an additional, deeply profound sensation that accompanies this state, one that is notoriously difficult to articulate, yet instantly recognizable to anyone who has briefly tasted this level of clarity. It is the overwhelming realization that the universe is absolutely not a cold, indifferent void. I do not mean this in a childish, sentimental way. This is not the comforting illusion that the cosmos is actively micromanaging your personal career goals. It is something infinitely more primal. When the veil thins, a fundamental property of the universal field itself becomes incredibly tangible. You are struck by the undeniable knowing that reality is not merely a sterile, mechanical clockwork of blind forces grinding toward inevitable decay. It possesses a living, breathing quality, a profound isness that lacks any clean linguistic translation. It is the exact same elusive truth that spiritual mystics across millennia have desperately chased with poetry, and that modern quantum physicists endlessly circle with complex mathematics, yet neither can perfectly capture. It resides right in the elusive, electric gap between the one who watches and the thing being watched, ultimately revealing itself to be neither, yet somehow miraculously both. You have undoubtedly encountered this sensation before. Perhaps it was a microsecond flash. Perhaps you lacked the exact vocabulary to define it, but your physical vessel remembers it intimately. When that truth washes over you, hidden layers of muscular tension that you never even knew you were holding suddenly evaporate. An internal doorway, previously locked tight without your conscious consent, effortlessly swings wide open. This profound release is exactly what is waiting for you, constantly resting just beneath the surface of your mental filter. To illustrate this perfectly, I want to highlight a brilliant piece of insight recently shared by someone in our community. This specific comment captures the internal architecture of this exact phenomenon so beautifully. Let us look at today's featured reflection. I will trust field guidance over logic. I will release as guided by the field without understandings of resistance. I found myself rereading these words several times before I fully grasped the sheer precision behind them. The vast majority of individuals who begin exploring these concepts inevitably fall into the identical trap of trying to intellectualize their way into direct contact. They desperately deploy logic as a crowbar to pry open the quantum field, hoping to overanalyze their psychological filter until they can successfully see through it. While basic logic certainly has its practical utility in the physical world, it is the absolute wrong instrument for this specific job. Why? Because logic itself is a manufactured byproduct of the very filter you are trying to escape. Logic operates strictly within the confined walls of your constructed, artificial reality. It is structurally blind to what the filter is erasing because it is birthed from the exact same machinery doing the erasing. What this commenter so elegantly synthesized in a way I frankly could not articulate better myself is that choosing to surrender to the intuition of the field over the rigidity of human logic is absolutely not a surrender of your intelligence. On the contrary, it is a profound evolution. It is the supreme recognition that an entirely superior, infinitely richer stream of information becomes available only when the arrogant, analytical ego finally relinquishes its desperate insistence on being the sole dictatorial authority on what is real. The latter half of that viewer's statement is undeniably the most challenging aspect to master, letting go under the guidance of the field without needing to comprehend the resistance. It means surrendering without demanding an intellectual explanation first. It requires bypassing the mind's obsessive need to dissect and approve the emotional release before granting permission for it to occur. This is excruciatingly difficult because your psychological barrier is terrified of relinquishing control blindly. Its entire evolutionary mandate is to analyze, process, and vet incoming data before allowing it through the gates. To this protective mechanism, letting go without a logical safety net feels exactly like stepping off a cliff into a dizzying freefall. In reality, you are not plummeting at all. However, making that leap requires a profound microsecond of faith, leaning into a force that your rational mind cannot possibly audit or guarantee beforehand. I want you to drop down into the comments right now and answer this. If your mental veil were to instantly dissolve for just 60 seconds, what specific details in your immediate environment would you perceive differently? I am not asking for your fantasy of what you wish were true. Focus on what you quietly suspect is already lingering right there in the room with you, desperately waiting behind the heavy curtain of your constructed reality. That very suspicion is, in itself, a profound intuitive beacon. Thank you to everyone who takes the time to share these reflections. They are vital to this community. You must realize that attaining absolute clarity is never a process of accumulation. You do not learn to witness true reality by acquiring new skills or stacking new philosophies on top of your current mindset. Rather, it is an art of subtraction, systematically stripping away the dense insulation wedged between your soul and the universe. This doesn't require a dramatic, permanent ego death. It is achieved through tiny, incredibly mundane, yet highly repeatable practices that slowly dial up the translucency of your mental screen, all without destroying the practical cognitive functions that allow you to safely navigate society. There are 3 distinct movements to this practice. The sacred pause. This is simultaneously the most basic and the most agonizingly difficult step. Before your brain rushes to interpret whatever is sitting right in front of you, you must intentionally suspend yourself in the breathless void prior to that interpretation. The goal is not to analyze the object with greater scrutiny. The objective is to simply coexist with it before the act of thinking even begins. Just take one deep breath in that magical, silent gap suspended between raw sensory perception and mental categorization. The object exists. You exist. In that fleeting window, absolutely zero conclusions have been drawn about what either of those facts signifies. True sight lives exclusively within that gap. The intellectual interpretation arrives later. The authentic seeing happens first, piercing the label. Your next task is to actively observe the psychological tag your brain slaps onto an object, and then consciously gaze through it. For instance, when you glance outside and the word tree instantly materializes in your mind, which it inevitably will, you must look past those 4 letters. Focus your entire being on the radically unique, physical entity that the generic word is lazily attempting to summarize. Observe this incredibly specific biological structure, bathed in this exact, unrepeatable angle of sunlight, existing in this singular millisecond in time, a configuration that has never occurred in the history of the cosmos and will never replicate itself again. The word tree is merely a linguistic shortcut. The actual physical form it points to is staggeringly, irreducibly specific. Your mental filter is designed to violently iron out this glorious specificity in the name of neurological efficiency, embracing the unexplained. Allow the raw quantum field to flood your awareness long before you attempt to neatly explain it away. Whenever a piece of reality crashes into your life that completely contradicts your established worldview, resist the immediate, panicked urge to update your mental model. Instead, just sit quietly with the anomaly. Let the friction burn. Allow the experience to remain beautifully unresolved and unexplained for a while. Let it exist as something vastly superior to your limited framework. The rare instances where the sheer magnitude of reality shatters your internal model are the exact moments when your artificial barrier is at its weakest, allowing the maximum amount of cosmic truth to pour in. I will be the first to admit that my own practice of these techniques is deeply flawed. Some days I am far more successful than others. Yet, even a messy, inconsistent application of these principles fundamentally alters the rich tapestry of daily life in a way that rigidly clinging to your filter never could. If I leave you with nothing else today, let it be this core realization: authentic reality has never been hiding from you. It has been patiently waiting in the margins of every single moment you spent ignoring it. It is pulsating in the room with you right now. It lives within the hyper-specific texture of this exact second. It is the invisible, energetic substrate supporting every single sensory input you are experiencing as you listen to my voice. It is heavily vibrating in the empty, silent spaces separating the words I am speaking from your brain's interpretation of them. Your spiritual amnesia was not a personal failure. It was merely a natural side effect of human evolution. You developed extraordinarily sophisticated psychological software to help you survive a dangerous world. Those tools served a profound, necessary purpose. They worked beautifully. But like all tools, they mutate into heavy chains when they become the only mechanism you know how to operate. When you finally remember how to open your eyes, the physical globe does not spontaneously rearrange itself. The world doesn't need to change. It has always been spectacularly complete, vibrantly present, and devastatingly real during all those years you couldn't quite reach out and touch it. The only thing that shifts is the pure quality of your connection to it. You alter the density of the invisible wall separating you from existence. You dictate how much of the raw universal field is permitted to wash over you, rather than settling for a cheap, pixelated sketch of it. Achieving this doesn't demand a spectacular, cinematic meltdown, a crisis, or a burning bush revelation. It requires something far more subtle and arguably much harder. A quiet, relentless dedication to pausing before judging, to gazing right through the labels, to letting the universe arrive before you interrupt to explain it. For those who find themselves currently navigating the disorienting chaos of a profound life transition, which is precisely when this mental screen tends to organically thin out, I have created a comprehensive resource. When that veil drops abruptly, the influx of raw reality can be incredibly overwhelming if you do not possess a reliable map to decode the experience. That is exactly why I authored the Quantum Transition Field Guide. It is a meticulously structured, 8-9-page manual designed specifically to support you during this profound psychological unraveling. It breaks down the precise phases of this awakening, detailing exactly how each stage physically manifests within your nervous system and your daily life. It contains 5 highly practical protocols to help you stabilize, all structured within an actionable 30-day framework. This is not fluffy, abstract theory. Think of it as a highly practical, navigational compass specifically designed for those brave individuals who have already wandered off the edge of the map and find themselves standing directly in the raw, unmapped territory of genuine experience. If you recognize yourself in that description and feel you are currently navigating this specific crossroads, you will find the direct link to this resource tucked safely away in the description box below. However, the most profoundly important piece of wisdom I can offer you as we draw this broadcast to a close is actually far less complicated than any written manual, structured course, or multi-step guide. It simply boils down to this singular, powerful directive. Examine whatever is physically resting right in front of you in this exact millisecond, and force yourself to look at it entirely before your mind rushes in to decree what it is. Do not wait until after the mental judgment has been made. You must catch the experience before. The authentic universe is standing right there. It has relentlessly remained right there, quietly waiting for you all along. You did not lose it. The ultimate truth is that your brain simply became an absolute master at aggressively teleporting your consciousness to a completely fabricated, pre-packaged destination first. A final reflection. I want to invite you to engage with this community one last time in the comments section. Take a deep breath and tell me, what specific element of your reality do you suspect you have been heavily censoring, that you finally feel completely ready to allow through the filter? Please, do not write down what you feel you should be open to, or what sounds like the most enlightened, socially acceptable answer. Write down exactly what your nervous system is actually prepared to absorb today. Those two responses are almost universally, vastly different from one another, and only the second one carries the raw, unedited honesty required to initiate true, lasting transformation. Thank you for watching. If the philosophical and scientific concepts explored in today's video resonated deeply with your personal journey, please hit the like button to support the channel and make sure to subscribe to our growing community. I cannot express enough genuine gratitude for the time, energy, and focused attention you chose to share with me today.